"Can I buy that dog, Daddy?" Lucy's voice was all bright hope and small hands. Daniel held the soggy envelope stamped final notice and felt the word press like ice. He promised her a yes, until the bank called and said their accounts were frozen. At dawn the van was taken. Behind a faded photograph, he found a brass key and a ledger. A man named Halvorsen smiled at the pier and taught them how polite danger could be. By nightfall, it was no longer just money missing. It was trust, love, and the shape of their future. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The envelope lay on the doormat like a small, cruel secret. Rain had turned the paper soft at the corners. The bold letters across the front were almost theatrical in their finality. Final notice. Daniel crouched, his fingers clumsy from the cold, and for a long moment he only looked at it. The rain kept tapping the porch roof in time with his pulse. He did not open the letter right away. He let it sit like a stone between him and the world. Inside, the house smelled of steam and old coffee. The kettle hissed in the kitchen. A pot of thin soup bubbled on the stove as if keeping its own small vigil. Light from the television painted the ceiling in a tired blue. The radiator clanked in a rhythm that was almost a sentence. Outside, the street was a smear of wet bricks and parked cars. A dog barked somewhere down the lane, short, sharp, then distant. Lucy sat at the windowsill with a blanket around her knees, the soft cut of her chin a silhouette against the glass. She had the kind of small hands that built up big dreams. Fingers quick to fold a paper boat, quick to climb into Daniel's lap and declare a treasure found. Today she pressed her forehead to the cold pane and watched the world as though it were a new story. She was 8, and when she smiled the whole house seemed to forgive itself for being tired. "Look, Daddy," she said. Her voice came slow, hopeful. "There's a poster on Mr. Hale's door. Puppies. Little brown ones. Can I buy that dog, Daddy?" Daniel looked at the poster through the wet window. The photograph showed a small brown puppy with eyes that seemed to ask permission for everything. The word sale was stamped across one corner. He imagined Lucy's small hand curled around soft fur, the sound of a collar jangling in the hallway. The way the dog would make loneliness a smaller thing. But the envelope on the doormat weighed down his thoughts like cold iron. He reached for it finally, fingers numb, and pulled out the paper. The letter was courteous in a way that made it more frightening. Numbers, dates, the polite end of patience. It told him that his account had been frozen. It told him they would be contacting the bank. It used words meant to be precise, and instead made everything vague and huge. It did not say when. It did not say why. It only said, action will be taken. He read it twice, and then folded it back to its shape, as if someone else had written on it, and he could fold away the truth. Lucy's small voice brought him back. "Please, Daddy." She turned, and her eyes were open wide and sure. "We could feed it together. I'll do the walking. I'll name it Milo. Please." He laughed without sound. The laugh came out like a cough. There were many things he wanted to say yes to, small, ordinary mercies that felt like a kind of salvation. But his chest felt empty in a new way, like a room after someone had moved out and taken one wall with them. He was a mechanic by trade. He fixed things that were already broken. He worked long hours in a garage that smelled of oil and rubber and the faint sweetness of engine heat. He had hands used to muscle and grease, hands that made small repairs with steady patience. He liked to think patience was the kind of quiet courage that kept a family from splintering. Tonight, patience looked different. It looked like not answering a small girl who wanted a dog. From the other side of the room came the soft thunk of a photograph being taken down. Daniel put the letter on the table and wiped his palms on his jeans. On the refrigerator door, a magnet held a photograph of Sarah, smiling, sunlight in her hair, taken 2 summers ago on a day when nothing seemed as heavy as it did now. He had not noticed, until he touched it now, that the corner of the photo was lifted a little, as if someone had been tracing the edge with a finger. The narrator in him wanted to explain. He wanted to tell Lucy about budgets, about the calls he would have to make in the morning, about the way the word frozen had moved from ice to bank accounts and settled into his life. But he also wanted to keep all the uglier truths sealed. To Lucy, the world could remain a place of puppies and posters. The truth, he thought, should come later, carefully folded and gentle. The house listened as he thought. The quiet made a shape around him, impartial and exact. In that space, the smallest sound had the weight of a verdict. The rustle of the newspaper in the next room, the distant thump of someone leaving, the soft click as the old heating pump shifted. He could feel the city breathing around them. Other people with their own envelopes, their own frozen accounts, their own small tragedies. The thought made him feel both less alone and more sharply exposed. Lucy climbed down from the sill and came to stand beside him. She was earnest in all the ways children are. Her shoes left faint wet marks on the floor. She pressed her small hand into his and looked up as if there were a simple bargain he could not refuse. "Please," she said again. "I'll sell my marbles. I'll clean your tools every night. I promise." Daniel's head filled with a calendar of chores and missed payments that turned into months. He could picture the work ahead. Long nights, second shifts, the clients who never tipped, the friends who had once promised to help and then had their own envelopes to answer. He had learned a language of small losses, one meal at a time, one broken appliance at a time. And yet there was something stubborn in him that could not imagine saying no to this face. He opened his mouth. For a heartbeat, he felt sure of what he would say. He would tell Lucy they could look after the puppy. He would picture the little life being warm on a cold floor. He would imagine laughter that would knit the house back together. But the letter on the table waited like a silent witness. Outside, the night deepened. The rain fell harder, and the street lights glowed like patient eyes. In the window's reflection, Daniel saw himself, a man in a coat with hair turning at the temples, the soft worry carved into the lines beside his mouth. The reflection did not flinch. It merely watched. There was a moment then, very small and very precise, where time seemed to tilt. Lucy's hand tightened. Daniel's fingers loosened. He felt the world press on him. The cost of a dog, the cost of warmth, the cost of a small promise that could not be taken back. His mind flashed with images he kept tucked away. Sarah in a hospital bed several years back. The smell of antiseptic. The way words can become useless when they are too heavy. Those memories were a cave he tried to stay out of. He had learned that sorrow could flood rooms without warning. "Daddy," Lucy whispered, as if asking permission to breathe. He looked down at her, and the decision happened not as a thunderclap, but as a slow, almost painful stillness. He thought of how the word freeze could mean both a sudden stop and a careful preservation. He thought about protecting Lucy from the worst of life, and about the ways protection sometimes became a kind of silence. He started, and the sound was small enough to be almost private. He folded the letter open again and pressed his thumb onto the neat, black type, as if he could make it less real. The narrator who stood outside his chest observed him kindly. Here was a man who loved his daughter enough to be afraid of failing her. That fear painted everything. Lucy waited. Outside, a puppy barked twice, and then was quiet, as though it too listened, waiting for an answer that could change everything. Daniel felt himself freeze, the motion of his heart slowing, words shelving in his mouth. He did not know the shape of what would come next. He only knew that for the first time in months, the house felt very close and very fragile, and that a single small request had become the hinge on which many hidden things might swing. He looked at Lucy and tried to find the right thing to say. The kettle lifted its head and hissed. The letter lay open like a small, cold map of the future. In the narrow space between them, the night waited, patient and dark and full of possibility. The morning air at the garage smelled of cold metal and old coffee. Daniel lifted the roll-up door and let in a pale strip of winter light. He breathed it in like something that might help him think. He had promised Lucy they would look at the puppy that day, and he meant to keep that promise. If nothing else, he told himself, a small kindness was something he could still give. The van was where he always left it, parked under the low eaves, keys tucked in the tray, tools locked inside. As he crossed the yard, he noticed a paper stuck under the windshield wiper. At first he thought it would be another final notice or a parking ticket. The letters were not as polite as the ones he had seen. Repossession order. A picture of a van that looked like his sat in the middle. His stomach tightened. He opened the paper with fingers that trembled a little. The form had a case number, an officer's name, and a bank stamp. It said the van would be taken that morning unless he could show proof of payment. Daniel read it again and then felt a kind of slow, sinking cold. He had always driven that van to keep the work going. He had slept in it sometimes when jobs ran late, and its back door had been a place where he taught Lucy to change a tire with a little careful instruction. Without it, he would be cut off from the small, steady wages that paid for the house and the groceries. He called the number glued to the top of the notice. A recorded voice told him the office opened at 9. There was nothing to do but wait. He wiped his hands on his jeans, and the smell of oil settled into his clothes like a skin. Lucy arrived at the garage on the small bus that brought her to her after-school club. She ran into his arms like she always did, hair damp from the drizzle. "Daddy," she said, breathless. "Mr. Hale said the puppy is still there. We can go now." Daniel forced a smile. He tucked his chin into her hair and felt the familiar lift of love that always came with it. "Let's go look," he said, as if the words could fix the empty knot in his chest. They walked a few blocks to Mr. Hale's house where the poster had been. The small yard smelled of wet earth and the bright cut of soap from someone who had cleaned a porch. The poster was still there. But Mr. Hale's door was open and a man stood on the step Daniel did not know. A man in a dark coat. A man with a clipboard and a presence like a weight. He introduced himself as Simon, from a company that handled payments and collections. His voice was level and careful, like someone trained to soften bad news. "We're here about the account linked to this address," Simon said. His eyes flicked to Daniel and then, almost as an afterthought, to Lucy. "Is this Mr. Clark?" "Daniel Clark." "Yes," Daniel said. His voice sounded small in the doorway. Simon turned a page on the clipboard. He had a paper with Daniel's name on it and a box filled with numbers. "There's been an issue with your account. We have instructions to place holds and proceed with seizure if necessary. You can call the bank for clarification." He handed the paper across. His hands were steady. His smile did not reach his eyes. Daniel felt his mind blur at the edges. He read the lines, but the letters were shapes that shifted. He thought of the envelope on his doormat, the kettle hissing, the photograph of Sarah he had not touched since the funeral. He felt a heat rise in his throat and then go out like a failed lamp. "Is this about the van?" He could not keep the guilt out of the question. Simon's clipboard tapped. "This is related to several accounts, Mr. Clark. There's been suspicious activity flagged. We recommend you speak with your bank. They can advise you on what steps to take to clear your name." His voice was impartial. Lucy clung to his hand. He could feel her heartbeat, small and fast. He wanted to tell her everything would be fine. Instead, he bent and whispered, "I'll sort it, Lucy. I promise." But promises were thin things, and the day thickened with hard facts. By noon, 2 men with uniforms and a small flatbed truck were at the garage. They said they had an order and that they must take the van. Daniel stepped in front of it and pleaded. He asked for time. He offered what little money he had in his wallet. The men were professional. They had done this many times. They put straps around the van and started to lift it onto the truck. He could hear Lucy sobbing behind him, small sounds like a bird trapped against a window. "Please," he said to the men, to the sky, to the photograph of Sarah that lived like a quiet accusation in his mind. "This is my job." The taller of the men paused. His name was Michael, and for a moment he looked at Daniel with an expression that might have been pity. "We don't choose people to do this, sir. We're just carrying out the order." When the van left, something heavy left with it, more than metal and tools. It took a piece of Daniel's future with it, a future he had only lately been brave enough to imagine. Lucy held onto him so tightly he could feel the bones of her arms. She cried without sound. They walked home through streets that seemed stranger without the van's familiar shadow. The world had not changed, only the way Daniel saw it. The small broken edges, bills, calls, names, became sharp enough to cut. At lunch, the phone finally rang. It was a number he did not recognize. A woman's voice said she was calling from the bank's fraud department. She spoke with the same careful, distant efficiency that seemed to follow bad news. "Mr. Clark, our systems have detected transfers and activity that do not match your normal profile. We have frozen your accounts to prevent further damage. There is an investigation." Daniel closed his eyes. "What transfers?" "There are several," she said. "Large sums sent to an account under the name of Halvorsen Investments. Also payments to an estate lawyer and a business marked as consulting services. Our records show a co-signer on one of the loans under the name Sarah Clark." Her voice hung in the air like a banner with words he could not yet read. Sarah. The name landed with a strange wobble. He had told himself many times that Sarah was someone to remember kindly, not to drag into invoices or accounts. She had been ill. She had been fragile. He had thought their life together had ended in a way that cleaned the slate, not muddied it with numbers. "But he started, and the sentence failed him. The bank representative did not fill the silence. She asked for identity verification and offered advice about contacting the police if he thought identity theft was involved. The paper trail, she said, would show the truth. After the call, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and stared at a small, folded envelope he found tucked behind the photograph of Sarah. His hand hovered above it. He had not noticed it before. Perhaps it had been slipped there in a hurry or tucked away and forgotten. The envelope had no stamp, only Lucy's name written on the front in a careful hand. Sarah's hand, he was almost certain. Inside was a note, folded small. The handwriting was familiar and made him feel like a child who had been called to a task he did not understand. It read, "Forgive me, Dan. Tell Lucy I tried. There is a key with it, a tiny brass thing on a loop." His throat closed. He had never known Sarah to write secret things. He had never imagined she would leave a key without saying where it led. The words felt like a confession and a plea. He pressed his thumb to the paper until the edges left a mark. Outside, the world moved on. A delivery van drove past. A woman called a dog into a yard. Inside, Daniel felt as if the house itself were holding its breath. Lucy stood beside him, leaning against the table, watching as if she could read the future in the wrinkle of his forehead. He told himself to be practical. He took the key and went to his small shed at the back of the yard, the one Sarah kept her sewing things in. The lock on the shed had a padlock that was old and stubborn. He fitted the tiny brass key into the lock and turned it. The click sounded small and ordinary, and then the world tilted. Inside, under a blanket of fabric scraps, he found a ledger. The pages were neat, each entry precise. Names, amounts, dates. There were figures that made no sense to him. Transfers to Halvorsen Investments, payments to a lawyer, the same word, consulting, that the bank had said. There were also small notes in the margin. Notes Sarah must have written in private for Lucy's education, keep aside in case, promise. And there, at the back, a line written in a hand that trembled with a kind of urgency. "If anything happens to me, Dan, do not trust everyone who says they help. There are names. Keep this safe." The last line was smudged, as if tears had fallen on the ink. The name below, it was half-faded, and when Daniel ran his finger over it, he could just make out the letters M-A-R-K. He could not decide if the name was a warning or an accusation. He sat down on a small stool, the ledger open across his knees. Lucy climbed into his lap and pressed her face into his chest. She smelled of soap and the day's drizzle. He had wanted to shelter her from everything, but now the shelter felt thinner than the paper the ledger was printed on. A betrayal would be a different thing later on, he thought, something that peeled back the face of someone he trusted. For now, there were only questions carved into neat lists. There were names and small payments, and a key that had led him into a room of private numbers. He did not yet know whom to blame. He only knew that someone he loved had tried to hide something. He only knew that the safe little life they had tried to keep had a crack in it, and through that crack something sharp and dangerous might come. When he looked up, the house seemed smaller, as if the walls had moved in to listen. The photograph of Sarah on the refrigerator caught the light. For a long moment he sat and watched the angle of her smile and tried to remember what she had sounded like when she had said the word forgive. The house held its breath with him. Outside, the day slid toward evening. The city lights came on like small, indifferent stars. Inside, Daniel folded the ledger after tracing the name until it blurred, and he put it back under the fabric as though burying an argument. The day had begun with a promise of a puppy and ended with a van gone and a key and a ledger that smelled of secrets. Lucy lay her small head on his knee and fell asleep to the sound of his breathing. He watched her and tried very hard to be brave for both of them. He had not yet named the betrayal. He only felt its shape as a shadow that had entered the house and sat down at the kitchen table. Daniel learned quickly that grief does not leave you neat corners to sweep. It settles in the joints and the small habits, where he put the keys, which cup he used for tea, the way he always checked Lucy's bedroom door at night even though she was 8 and brave. As the days passed after the van was taken and the ledger found, his routine became a tightrope walked over old maps and new uncertainties. At the garage, the men who hired him waited at the counter with cars idling like patient animals. He greeted them with a smile that felt borrowed and paid for later. He listened to the list of repairs and let the wrench feel honest in his hands. Work was a place he could do the counting that life no longer offered. Turn this bolt, measure that gap. But his mind kept returning to the small brass key and the smudged name at the back of Sarah's ledger. Mark. The name looped in his head like a sentence he had not learned to say out loud. Lucy watched him more closely now. Children noticed the slackening in a voice long before adults do. When he came home late, she would be awake, waiting on the couch with a bowl of cereal and eyes that had learned to be serious early. She tried to be practical about money in a way that both wounded and warmed him. She suggested selling toys, mowing neighbors' lawns, and walking dogs. The practicalness was a shield. The softness beneath it he could see when she thought no one watched. Once, while she pretended to braid a ribbon into his hair, she mumbled, "Daddy, if you need help, tell me. I can be very brave." He wanted to believe her. He wanted, with a kind of stubborn hunger, to believe that honesty would fix things. But honesty was tricky. The ledger had made him see that even memories could be tangled with business. Sarah's careful notes had seemed like loving plans, money set aside for Lucy, promises to keep, but they had also hinted at other hands in their life, people pulling strings he could not yet see. He felt both angry at the idea that someone could use Sarah's name and guilty for not knowing more when she was alive. At the bank, the woman who spoke to him was patient but distant. Her name badge read Peter. An odd little joke, Daniel thought, trying to keep the shape of his evenings from unraveling. "We will cooperate with your request," Peter said, reading from a script that had been written for people who fell from stability. "There is an investigation into unauthorized transfers. If you think fraud has occurred, we advise filing a police report." He went through the motions. He filled forms with his left hand, as if the ledger might be a test of dexterity. He left the bank with a copy of a complaint and a number to call. On the street, he stopped and watched a father with a stroller cross the road. The man's laughter with his child felt like salt on an open wound. Simon continued to appear in small, controlled ways. He had the composure of a man used to delivering uncomfortable news and the habit of looking like he had not taken a side. To Daniel, Simon was both a gatekeeper and a mirror, calm, slightly distant, and unerringly correct about details. One evening, long after the garage closed, Simon knocked at the back door. He did not come in. He stood on the step, hands shoved into his coat pockets. "Mr. Clark," he said, "I wanted to make sure you received our letters. There are steps you can take. We can offer advice on consolidating accounts. It won't be immediate, but it will help." Daniel watched him. "Why would you help?" he asked. The question sounded small and blunt. Simon smiled in a way that bothered him, too practiced, like someone who had practiced all sorts of sympathies. "Because it eases everything if things are orderly, Mr. Clark. People like order." The words were almost a promise, and almost nothing. Daniel felt, somewhere at the center of his chest, the stirrings of mistrust, less the big burning betrayal and more a slow corrosion, the feeling that someone was rearranging the map while he slept. Home became a place of bargaining. Daniel found himself measuring every yes and no as if they were weights. He told Lucy small half-truths to keep the air calm. "We'll look at the puppy next month," he told her, and he believed the lie long enough to feel its shape. At night, after Lucy slept, he read the ledger by lamplight. The neat columns of numbers formed a kind of private geography. Payments to Halvorsen tracked like footsteps to a door he could not open. Consulting services, estate lawyer, a payment mark clearing. Some entries were annotated with dates that matched hospital stays and prescription refills. Others did not. The ledger made Sarah into a puzzle with missing pieces. In the evenings, he found solace in small rituals. He took Lucy to the small park near the river on Sundays. He taught her how to skip stones, how to look for shapes in the clouds. Those moments felt like clean pages in a book that was otherwise stained. He tried to show Lucy how to be brave without teaching her how to carry the world alone. He found that courage had an awkward geometry. Sometimes it required small compromises and sometimes sharp, honest edges. Among the neighbors, whispers formed. An old woman named Helen brought over soup more than once, and along with it, the slow questions that come with caring. "Are you sure you don't want me to speak with the bank?" she offered, as if her voice could bridge the distance between forms and heart. Daniel thanked her. He accepted the soup. He refused the interference. He felt both grateful and isolated, as if he were being watched through a glass he could not touch. There was tension between him and his friend Mark, who had been a quiet regular at the garage, who came for small repairs and often lingered with a coffee. Mark's smile had always been easy. Now it sometimes came with an edge. One afternoon, after a long day, Mark leaned against the engine bay and watched Daniel close his toolbox. "You look tired," Mark said, and the words carried an empathy that made Daniel wary. "Anything I can do?" Daniel kept his voice low. "No, it's just paperwork." Mark's eyes flicked to the ledger's mention that Daniel dared not speak aloud. "If it's money, I could." He stopped himself, the sentence unfinished. The air between them lost a little warmth. Daniel felt something coil at the thought of Mark offering help. There was a memory, small and confusing, of Mark visiting Sarah in the hospital, of Mark talking quietly at her bedside. At the time, Daniel had thanked him and then shoved the memory away like a tool that did not fit. Now, when Daniel thought of Mark, that old elastic unease snapped tight. He wanted to ask Mark if he knew anything about Halvorsen or the transfers, but the question felt like a blade. It might cut a useful neighbor into something else, an enemy, a betrayer, or simply a man who had done what people do: help, then step away. He imagined possibilities and found his head full of scenarios, each one hungry. Lucy sensed the change in the air and invented a school play where she was always the brave knight who saved the day. She cast Daniel as the king who returned from battle with a secret. At night they played out scenes. Daniel would stumble through lines about treasure while she declared, in all the force of a child's logic, that love was the real hoard worth keeping safe. Those moments dissolved his fatigue for a little while. They were proof that some things could still be simple. And yet, there was a weight to the simplicity. Sarah's note, "Forgive me, Dan," hung over him like a promissory note made in tears. He thought often of what she had meant. Had she spoken truth and hidden danger? Had she tried to protect them and instead woven them into a plan whose seams he could now see? Or had she been misled? As he watched Lucy sleep, her small chest rising and falling, he told himself to be practical. He would open the ledger to the end and follow the dates. He would speak to the bank, to the police if needed. He would ask Mark what he knew. He would also try, with a stubbornness that sometimes felt foolish, to keep small things bright. The way Lucy clapped at a good stone skip, the way toast tasted better when butter melted into it. In moments of cold detachment, the impartial observer in him catalogued facts. Van repossessed, accounts frozen, ledger found. Hint of Mark. The investigators, part of his mind, lined up with evidence like soldiers. But another part, the part that had loved Sarah enough to keep her photograph on the fridge, felt an ache that was not rational. It asked softer questions. Who would take advantage of a woman already small with illness? Who would use her name as a pass? As the days shortened and the ledger's shadows lengthened, the neighborhood watched and made up stories. Daniel learned the cost of asking questions. Sometimes people answered. Sometimes they offered their silence. The deeper cost, he realized, was to keep his daughter's world whole while he slowly tore apart the map that had told him where to go. He had to find the truth without shattering Lucy's trust. He had to be both a careful father and a stubborn seeker of answers. The two roles tugged at him like opposing oars, and he rowed forward anyway, because standing still felt like failing the only person who still believed in him, without reservation. Daniel had always trusted Mark the way you trust a door that has never stuck, because it had never stuck. Mark arrived with a grin, a mug of coffee, and the casual knowledge of how to take a stubborn bolt loose. He came to the house sometimes with a smile and a joke, and sometimes with a tray of sandwiches for Lucy when Daniel worked late. He had been there in the small, ridiculous ways that make a neighborhood feel like a net. So when Daniel first noticed a scrap of paper tucked under the oil rag in the back corner of the garage, a printout with the name Halvorsen and an address, he did not want to believe his eyes. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket as if he could fold the world smaller. The name had been at the back of Sarah's ledger, half smudged, M-A-R-K. He had told himself the smudge was nothing. He had told himself Mark was a friend. On a night when Lucy slept early and the house breathed in small, even rhythms, Daniel went to Mark's house. He told himself it was better to ask and be foolish than to live in the slow, grinding ache of doubt. Mark opened the door in a shirt with oil stains from his own projects, and the same easy smile as always. Behind him, a radio played quietly, and the smell of warm bread came from the kitchen. "Dan," Mark said, like a man who had no idea the ground had shifted underneath them both. "You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel did not answer the way Mark expected. He held up the scrap of paper. "What's this?" he asked. His voice was steady because he had learned steadiness could hide a crater. Mark's face changed in a way Daniel had never caught before. For a second, the muscles around his mouth tightened and his fingers found the doorframe, like a man steadying himself on a ladder. "I can explain," Mark said softly. He stepped aside and invited Daniel in, as if he were admitting a guest to some quiet confession. The kitchen was small and smelled of yeast and onions. Mark poured them both a cup of coffee. The comfort was the same as always, but Mark's hands betrayed him. They trembled just enough that Daniel noticed. The narrator, the impartial observer, watched the scene. A man waiting to be believed. Another man braced against betrayal. The house holding its breath. "You were in the hospital," Mark began, not yet meeting Daniel's eyes. "When Sarah was sick, I was there because she asked me to be. She trusted me. She asked me to help with money matters because she thought." He stopped, swallowed, and arranged his coffee like a man trying to steady the paper boats of his words. Daniel leaned against the counter. "Help how, Mark?" Mark looked up then, and Daniel saw the rawness in his face. "She wanted to leave Lucy something safe. She asked me to keep some things aside. She said she didn't want a fuss, that I should hold on to it until she felt things were better." Mark's hand found the little brass loop on the kitchen key holder and fiddled with it. "I thought I was doing the right thing." The confession landed like a stone. It could have been a relief. It could have been proof that Sarah had acted wisely. But the ledger's pages and the bank's phone call had already taught Daniel the world is not kind to neat answers. "What did you do with it?" Daniel asked. The question sounded small and terrible in the quiet. Mark's shoulders sagged as if a load had been on them for a long time. "I put it into an account," he said. "I was told about Halvorsen. They promised a short-term investment that would cover Lucy's education and whatever else might come. It wasn't huge at first." Sarah agreed. She thought it would grow. And Daniel pressed. He could feel the old, patient machinery of anger winding up in him. Mark's eyes filled. "It didn't go like that. The money moved. There were consulting fees, things I didn't understand at the time. There were transfers to lawyers for clearing. And there were payments that I thought were for specialists. And then it started to be used to cover other debts I didn't know existed. They told me it was temporary. They told me it was for protection. I trusted them because Sarah trusted me." Daniel's pulse thudded hard enough that the words blurred. The ledger had spoken of consulting, of an estate lawyer, of transfers to Halvorsen. Mark's voice clung to the edges of those words and filled them with flesh. "You put Sarah's money into a place you didn't check," Daniel said. He tried for anger and found it rawer than he expected. "Why my name? Why her name on loans, Mark? Why sign anything without telling me?" Mark's fingers twisted the rim of his coffee cup. "I was scared," he admitted. "I thought I was protecting you. You were losing work. I thought if I could make the money grow fast." He stopped and laughed, a short broken sound. "I was a fool. I made a choice I shouldn't have. And when it started to go wrong, I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could fix it before it got big." The second narrator, the empathetic voice, leaned in. Here was a man who had loved someone enough to make reckless promises. He sought to protect and, in trying, burned the thing he wanted to keep safe. Mark's betrayal, if it was betrayal, had the shape of a wound opened by good intentions. "But who did you deal with? Who promised this?" Daniel demanded. The ledger was a map, and he needed a name to follow. Mark closed his eyes like a man remembering a hard lesson. A man named Halvorsen. He had an office not far from here. He had friends who knew lawyers. He said he could set up trusts and accounts without making a fuss. He had someone who handled the transfers, someone who said everything would be discreet. I thought I was covering the cost of Sarah's care. I thought I was making a future. And the loans? The co-signer? Daniel asked. Why would Sarah be on anything? Mark's jaw tightened. I signed things because Sarah was too tired to sign. She didn't have the strength. She asked me to sign. She asked me to trust them. I should have told you. I should have. He broke off and the sentence fell. Daniel's mind spun with images. Sarah too tired to sign. Mark a quiet presence at a bedside. Promises whispered in corridors. He thought of how grief had made him blind to certain kinds of betrayal. He thought of Lucy playing night in the park and how fragile their world had been. The betrayal landed not as a single blow, but as a series of small, precise cuts. Choices made in secret. Money moved in the dark, the van repossessed, accounts frozen. Mark had been the friend who had visited the hospital. He had been the man who fixed Daniel's car and brought bread. He had been the one who, in trying to protect, had tangled them in someone else's web. "Why tell me now?" Daniel asked, quieter. "Why come clean when my life is falling apart?" Mark looked at him with tired eyes that had seen too much. "Because it's getting worse," he said simply. "They said I could not pull the money back. Halvorson said it was tied up in legal consulting, and that the only way was to bring more funds. They were stalling, Dan. I tried to find a way, but I couldn't. I thought maybe I could take on more work, get you a loan. I tried to help by covering costs. I didn't know they would push it this far." Daniel felt anger and pity in equal parts. The house they had built on small acts of trust had shifted under his feet. "You failed Sarah," he said, the words heavy. "You failed me." Mark flinched. "I know," he whispered. "I am sorry. I thought I could fix it." There was a long, aching silence. The impartial narrator recorded the facts. The empathetic voice felt the wounds. Betrayal was now not a distant idea, but a person sitting across the kitchen table. A friend who had done wrong while thinking he did right. Lucy slept on unaware. The small brass key lay forgotten in Daniel's jacket pocket. The ledger, a map to a place both dangerous and necessary. Daniel left Mark's house that night with his hands empty of answers, but full of a new, sharp knowledge. The enemy was close. The man who had once mended a broken headlight had also helped bend the truth. The ledger's smudged name was no longer an accident. It was a signature. Outside, the night was cold and honest. Daniel walked home with the weight of 2 lives on his shoulders, the life he had to protect, and the life he must now unravel. The first twist in their story had become real. The person he had called friend had, in trying to help, bound them to a stranger's promise and to a dangerous debt. The road forward was darker than he had imagined, and somewhere beyond the shadow of betrayal, something else waited, a deeper truth he had not yet seen. The next weeks moved like a river that had lost its calm, fast, cold, and full of things that pushed against his ankles. Daniel woke each morning with the weight of a ledger in his head, though it stayed locked in the shed where he pretended it could not be touched. He went to work and let his hands speak for him. Pull, pry, tighten. Because hands know how to answer a machine when words feel too dangerous. But the world kept finding ways to ask him questions he could not easily answer. Bills came like dripping water. The electricity bill arrived with a polite, official stamp, overdue. The landlord left a short note tucked beneath the door. "We need to talk about the rent." At Lucy's school, Miss Aldridge called to remind him that term fees were due if Lucy was to go on the school trip. She spoke kindly, but there was a firmness to her kindness that Daniel could not fold into a promise. "We can help if you need time," she said, but even that help had limits. The small kindnesses were measured in days and deadlines. At the garage, customers paid in scraps. Late calls, tight wallets, promises to bring cash tomorrow. The work piled up like a patient debt. Once, a man came in for a simple brake job and left with the engine running and 300 pounds short of what he owed. Daniel held his tongue and wrote it off as kindness better saved for other days. His pride taught him to count every spare coin and to sleep with his shoes by the bed in case he had to run for work at dawn. Simon appeared with an offer that smelled faintly of danger wrapped in neat paper. He found Daniel one afternoon under the hood of a car, his forearms dark with oil. "There are private options," Simon said, not unkindly. "People who will lend with quick terms. Short-term bridge loans. It's not ideal, but it keeps things moving." His voice was calm enough to be trusted, and in the small world of deadlines a bridge sometimes sounds like a rescue. Daniel felt the pull. The ledger had taught him that promises made with clean words could hide knives. But the eyes of his daughter had a stubborn light in them that made the risk seem smaller, or at least worth thinking about. He waited. Alone now, more time to recover, the puppy still possible. He imagined the laughter and the collar jangling by the door. He imagined Lucy's face lit up with sunrise. Then he imagined the bank letters again, and the van being taken, and the trust he might lose in another way. The choice sat like a coin balanced on its edge. Inside him, two voices argued. The impartial voice cataloged the facts. Loans have interest. Bridge loans have penalties. Simon is connected to collection work. The softer voice asked what a father should do when time is cruel, and the child's joy is waiting on a simple yes. The narrator who loved them both felt this like a bruise. What he could not afford might be a mercy. What he took as mercy might be an anchor that dragged them under. At night, when Lucy slept with her hand in his, Daniel sometimes dreamed of a man with a paper face who counted out small bills and smiled when the next bill arrived. He woke with the taste of metal in his mouth and the feeling of a trap closing slowly. He began to avoid the ledger, not because he was afraid of its pages, but because each line was an accusation, and he could not read the accusation without laying blame on someone he still wanted to care for. Mark did what friends sometimes do. He offered work, and he bargained with pride. "I can get a job pulling cables," he said one morning, voice low against the hummed radio at the garage. "It pays cash. Maybe a week's worth, and we can make a dent." There was urgency in his tone that could have been hope or fear. Daniel wanted to believe him. He also remembered the way Mark's hands had trembled when he confessed about Halvorsen. A man who made a bad decision could still be trusted sometimes, Daniel told himself. But another part of him wondered if trusting Mark too much would only tangle him deeper. The neighbors watched and offered small remedies and big eyes. Helen knocked on the door and left bread wrapped in paper. "If you need me to pick Lucy up, I can," she said like a shield. Gossip found its way to them in small, careful sounds. Whispers at the post office, the tilt of a head at the corner store. Lucy noticed the looks and asked questions with an honesty that hurt. "Why do people look at us like that, Daddy?" Daniel answered with stories about weather and work, and she nodded, believing him because she had to. Then came a night that tightened everything to a raw point. Daniel returned home late from a job, dirty and hollow, and found a plain envelope on the kitchen table. He opened it with fingers that knew how to keep steady. Inside was a single line written in a hand he recognized and did not want. "We can help, but it will cost. Meet us at the pier, midnight. No police. No witnesses. H." The letter felt like a stone dropped into a well. Water rippled. The ledger, Halvorsen, the transfers, Mark's name, all of them circled together. Daniel read the line again and felt the room tilt. The impartial voice told him this was a trap. The empathetic one lit with something sharper, raw, protective, and a little desperate. He thought of Lucy in the next room, asleep, of her small hand, of the way she trusted him to answer for what he could not yet speak. He told Mark. Mark swallowed and cursed softly. "I can go with you," he offered. "We can make sure it's safe." Daniel saw fear in Mark's face, and also a resolve that had not been there before. It pulled at him, the idea that two men could walk into shadow and barter for light. The choice lay out in plain terms. Meet H at the pier and risk unknown danger for the chance of money, or refuse and watch small doors close one by one until the house became a museum of things they once had. Each option had a cost measured not just in money, but in what Daniel's daughter would lose. Her small weekend treats, her place on the school trip, the puppy she had not yet chosen. That night he sat on the stairs with the radiator hissing, ledger heavy in the shed, and the single note burning in his pocket. He let each possible future pass through his mind like frames in a cheap movie. Scenes of Lucy laughing with a dog, of eviction papers, of a police station, of a stranger at the pier with a flat smile. The narrator who watched from a distance cataloged risk and probability. The one who felt weighed every possibility by the measure of a child's need. When dawn came, he had not decided. The ledger waited. The offer on the table grew sharper. His choices were thinning like pages torn from a calendar. He was a man becoming a map of small, urgent decisions, and the roads all seemed to lead to shadow. In that narrow space between what he could do and what he should do, Daniel realized something cold and steady. The path of protection sometimes demands stepping onto ground you cannot yet name, and stepping there might change who you become. The pier smelled of salt and old rope. Fog rode low on the water, like breath from a sleeping animal. Daniel and Mark kept the shadows, their footsteps soft on wet planks that creaked like tired bones. Daniel's pocket felt heavy with a single note signed H, and his palms hummed with a noise that was almost prayer. Lucy's small sleep face floated behind his eyes, small and trusting, and he wrapped that image tight like a talisman. Mark walked beside him, shoulders hunched against the wind. The night made Mark look older, the lines around his mouth sharper. They reached the far end of the pier, where the light from the lamp swung in a slow, tired arc. A figure stood there under the light, a man in a coat too fine for the dock, hands in his pockets, watching the black water. When he turned, Daniel saw his face in the lamp's pale wash, clean-shaven, calm, the kind of face that made lies look respectable. "Mr. Clark," the man said, voice even. "You came." Daniel kept his voice steady. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man smiled thinly. "You can call me Harold Halvorsen." The name landed like a stone. Daniel's heart punched against his ribs. Halvorsen had ink on the ledger, a whisper on a phone call. Now he breathed beside him. "You took my van," Daniel said, words falling out like small stones. "You froze our accounts." Halvorsen's smile didn't change. "I took what was promised, Mr. Clark. Money moves. Contracts move. People sign." He had the soft, practiced cruelty of someone who arranged pain into forms. Your friend Mark signed. He had good intentions and poor judgment. Mark stepped forward like a man pushing through a current. "You used Sarah," he said. The sentence was cut clean. The night seemed to hold its breath. Halvorsen cocked his head. "You seem to think emotions change contracts." He folded his hands as if closing a book. "But emotions don't cover the cost of risk." Mrs. Clark agreed to terms she could understand at the time. "You should have trusted those who offered help." Daniel's chest tightened. "She was dying," he said. "She trusted Mark because she trusted us." "You took that and turned it into," he couldn't finish. The water hissed under the pier, swallowing words. Halvorsen's gaze slid to Mark, sharp and unafraid. "Mr. Clark," he said, using Daniel's name on purpose, "you should have let professionals handle this. If someone promises returns, sometimes returns are made from other people's losses." He shrugged as if admitting a simple fact. The lamp buzzed. Somewhere a gull cried. Daniel felt anger rise like heat. "You lied to her. You lied to him. You pushed papers with names she barely had the strength to sign." Halvorsen's mouth schooled into something almost like pity. "I never lied about potential gains," he said. "I never told anyone how the money would be moved beyond my confidence. Those are legal boundaries and delicate words. If you seek the law, there are people who will listen. If you seek retribution here, with me, I can offer a simpler arrangement." "You want money," Daniel said. "You want us to pay more." Halvorsen's smile widened. "I want what is fair. A bridge to cover short-term losses. A sum that buys a path forward." He tapped his pocket. "There is a cost for the convenience." Daniel noticed movement at the edge of the light, a second figure stepping from the dark. Simon, the man who had first introduced the freeze with polite detachment, the man who had offered orderly solutions, and now a casual presence on the pier like a groom at a funeral. Daniel had trusted Simon's neutrality once. Seeing him here felt like ice pressed to an open wound. "Simon," Daniel said, voice raw. "You're with him." Simon's expression didn't change. "I work where there are needs," he said softly. "Some needs are met with official channels, some with private ones. Halvorsen provides speed that bureaucracy cannot." The two men, Halvorsen and Simon, looked at each other like two halves of the same machine. The reality snapped into place with a cold clarity. The freeze, the repo, the polite offers of loans. Everything had been a pressure, a squeeze to force them into the open palm of someone who knew how to close it. Mark laughed once, a small broken sound. "You used my visits to the hospital," he said. "You used Sarah's trust." Halvorsen cocked his head. "You used me. You chose a path and signed documents. You were not naive. You were hopeful. The world takes advantage of hope when hope isn't careful." Daniel stepped forward, every muscle coiled. "You will give back what you took. You will unfreeze our accounts. You will return the van." Halvorsen's face hardened. "You misunderstand how this works. The funds are tied through channels. There are fees now and legal papers. There are other investors. Perhaps you will see it in court and win, perhaps not. But there is a quicker way." He offered his hand to Mark in a strange, performative gesture. "You know the terms." Mark's face crumpled. Finally a rawness that was not masked by excuses. He looked at Daniel and then at the men who had profited from Sarah's trust. "I'll get it," he said quietly. "I'll bring money." "No," Daniel said. "We won't feed this." Halvorsen's eyes flashed. "Then perhaps I must make an example." His voice was cold now. "We'll take what's left until you pay, or until the law does. You'll have a choice, Mr. Clark. Bow to procedure, or meet me again with a different offer." Daniel's fists clenched. He felt dizzy with an old, righteous anger that had been sleeping. "I'll fight," he whispered. "I'll bring this to the police. I'll show them your records." Halvorsen looked amused. "You'll show them a trail of legitimate contracts and signatures. You'll show them consent. A judge will see that Ms. Clark agreed to terms. The law is a mirror that reflects what people can prove." Simon's presence made the dock feel smaller. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "There are ways to make things right, Daniel. Not everyone offers them." At the edge of the pier, the seawater slapped the wooden posts. Halvorsen's men, two stocky figures who had blended into the fog, moved closer. The threat no longer needed language. It settled into the space like a second layer of night. Daniel's heart thudded. Mark's jaw worked. Then Mark did something Daniel did not expect. He pulled a small envelope from his pocket, the one Daniel had once found in the shed, the tiny brass key folded inside, and held it up like a confession. "It's my fault," Mark said, voice breaking. "I signed. I put the money through because I saw a way out. If you want someone to blame, blame me, not them." Halvorsen's face flickered with surprise and a sharp grin. "That's convenient," he said. "If he takes responsibility, it simplifies matters." Mark straightened. "I'll tell the police everything. I will say I signed for gains and that I lied to Dan. I will give up what I can. I will." His voice hit a wall of pain. "I will pay them however I can. I'll go to them, ask for a deal, give up assets. I'll do it because I love Lucy. Because I loved Sarah." The men shifted. Halvorsen's calm slipped. The scene had turned from negotiation to a kind of sorrowful theater, an admission of guilt offered like a sacrament. Daniel felt the world tilt. Betrayal had been a jagged blade. Now redemption walked into the light wearing the same face. Mark's choice was not a clean solution. It was raw and dangerous. He was offering himself because he believed it might save the people he loved. Simon stepped forward. "We don't need martyrs," he said. "We need settlements. You can work with us, Mr. Clark. We can put the parts back together." "No," Daniel said, voice steady as a rope. "I will go to the police. I will not trade my life for papers. If Mark confesses, he will do it with counsel. If Halvorsen has done wrong, the law must decide." Halvorsen sneered. "You believe in justice. Fine. Let us see how much faith a judge has in a mechanic and a dying woman's signatures." At that moment, the lamp light glared and a siren's wail cut the fog like a blade, distant, then growing. Two police cars rounded the pier with lights painting the water blood red and blue. The figures who had been Halvorsen's men froze. For a second, everything hung on the sound. The lamp's breath, the gull's cry, Lucy's sleep face in Daniel's mind. Officers spilled from the cars, their voices firm. "Hands where we can see them," one barked. Faces turned. Halvorson's composure slid. He looked small in the flare of police light, his fine coat suddenly out of place. Daniel watched Halvorson's lips move as an officer read rights. Simon's confident posture crumpled when he realized a warrant had been served. Someone higher up had finally noticed the pattern Halvorson had left. It was not clean justice yet. It was only the beginning. But it was a start. Mark's shoulders sagged, relief and fear and the weight of consequence all battling. He looked at Daniel and for the first time let shame and apology come without armor. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Daniel could feel the raw edges of everything. Anger, the ache of betrayal, the fragile filament of gratitude for a friend who had chosen to tell the truth at last. The officers took statements. Halvorson's men were cuffed. Halvorson himself argued, but his voice was less certain now. Simon was held for questioning. The ledger, when found in a leather folder in Halvorson's bag, looked like a map where the paths finally met. Later, after the lights and the clatter, when the pier had returned to fog and the gulls had gone quiet, Daniel walked home with Mark at his side. The van was still gone, the account still frozen for now, but something else had shifted. The net that had tightened around them had a knot someone else could now untie. Mark's small confession would not erase harm. There would be court dates, explanations, nights where Lucy asked again why people did terrible things. But for the first time since the ledger had been found, Daniel felt that truth could be made to hold weight outside of paper. The law, witnesses, human confession. He felt something that looked like relief and something that hurt. The realization that trust, once broken, asks for a long work to mend. Lucy slept on, unaware of the night's terrible truths. Daniel thought of Sarah's last note, "Forgive me, Dan," and he understood then what forgiveness could demand, not ignoring wrong, but meeting it, speaking it aloud, and deciding what to hold and what to let go. The pages of the ledger might point to thieves and lies, but the house they would build after this would require confession, repair, and a bravery of a different kind. The days after the pier were quieter in a way that felt heavy, like a room where someone had turned off the radio and left the clock ticking very loudly. Police calls, statements, and meetings took up the hours that used to be for work and doing simple, ordinary things. Halvorson and his men were in custody. Simon was being questioned. The ledger, those neat pages of Sarah's life and the web that had grown around it, was now a piece of evidence rather than a secret that lived under blankets. The legal machine moved slowly, but it moved, and movement felt like hope. The bank unhooked a small part of the freeze after seeing the initial police report. It was not everything, and it was not quick, but the hold on one of the accounts was lifted enough to cover immediate needs. Groceries, Lucy's school trip, a week's rent. The van did not come back on the same day, and there were more meetings about repossession and recovery. But a lawyer assigned by the police told Daniel there was a path to reclaim some of what had been taken if the court found in their favor. That future had deadlines and forms and hearings, but at least it had a shape. Mark turned himself in with a kind of tired dignity. He told the officers everything. How Sarah had asked him to help, how he had trusted Halvorson, how he had signed papers while hoping to keep a promise. He confessed not for ease, but to be honest. The confession did not erase what had happened. There were charges to face and restitution to reckon with. The judge, when the day came, listened to the story of a dying woman and a friend trying to protect a child. The law had its own language and its own pace, but even the court felt the human weight of what had been done. Mark was not given kindness without consequence. He was given a chance to make amends under supervision and to work to. It was justice that left room for repair, and Daniel felt the complicated relief of that. This was not forgiveness without cost, but accountability mixed with a path forward. At home, the neighborhood did small, astonishing things. Helen organized a food run and a small fund. Mr. Hale, who had sold the puppies, heard the story and held on to one little brown pup for them. People who had once watched from doorways stepped forward with cups of tea and job leads. The community did not fix everything, but they made the house lighter, and that light mattered. Lucy clapped when Daniel told her about the kindnesses. She learned that sometimes strangers can become friends when they choose to care. Daniel found himself in the quiet hours, sitting with Sarah's photograph and thinking about the ledger, the key, and the last note she had left. "Forgive me, Dan." Those words had been a small, raw thing when he first read them, half a sorrow and half a plea. He realized now that forgiveness was not a one-time decision like signing a paper. It was slow work, a series of small choices made day by day. He had to decide if he would live as a man made smaller by what had been taken, or if he would be larger by making space for truth and for people to repair what they had broken. There were nights he thought of revenge, images of Halvorsen in a cell, of Mark paying with everything he had. Those feelings were natural and bright and dangerous. But another thought kept surfacing. If he fed hatred, would Lucy learn to feed hatred too? He wanted to teach her a different lesson. He wanted to show her how justice and mercy could live in the same house without canceling each other out. That did not mean softening hard things or letting wrong drift away. It meant telling the truth and asking for consequences. And then, when those consequences were being met, choosing whether to keep a door open for reconciliation. For Daniel, that was the heaviest, bravest kind of work. He met with Mark several times after the confession. The meetings were not easy. They were full of silence and small apologies. Mark offered plans shifts at a cable crew, selling a small inherited property, speaking in court with complete honesty. Daniel listened. There were nights when he felt the old rage return, and other nights when he remembered how Mark had sat by Sarah's bedside and how he had brought bread when times were thin. The betrayal had been real and sharp, and yet Mark's willingness to take responsibility was also real. Daniel chose to let the legal process do the punishment it needed to do, and to hold a space for Mark to repair what he could. It was not mercy that erased consequences. It was mercy that made room for rebuilding. The courtroom was quieter than Daniel had expected. He sat with Lucy holding his hand, and when Mark spoke, his voice was thin but steady. He said he regretted what he had done and named it plainly. He promised to help undo it. The judge listened, and the sentence included restitution, community work, and supervision. It was not mercy without cost. It was a sentence that measured both wrongdoing and the will to repair. Lucy's small fingers tightened around Daniel's, then loosened, and later she asked, with the earnestness of a child who believed in simple solutions, "Daddy, will the puppy still come?" That small, human question became a hinge. Mr. Hale had kept a puppy for them, and the neighborhood fund covered the adoption fee. The little brown dog came home in a box of blankets, and so much gratitude that it made the house feel fuller than any money could. Lucy named him Milo, just as she had imagined. The sound of a collar jingling in the hallway was a balm that did not erase loss, but eased it. Daniel watched Milo chase dust motes in a shaft of sun, and felt a kind of everyday miracle. Small, stubborn, and real. In the months that followed, the ledger's lines were examined in court, and Halvorsen's records showed a pattern of manipulation. The judge ordered assets frozen and restitution proceedings opened. It was slow and never clean, but it moved toward repair. Daniel started getting work again, through a connection Mark had found and through a steady income from a neighbor who needed home repairs. They would not be wealthy again overnight, but they were not alone. Daniel kept Sarah's photograph on the fridge and placed the little brass key in a box with Lucy's school ribbons. He did not throw the ledger away. Instead, he wrapped it in cloth and put it on a shelf, not hiding it but honoring it. It was a map not only of loss, but of the way a life had tried to care for the future. The moral he carried was not tidy. He learned that people who love can still harm, and people who harm can still choose to make right. He learned that forgiveness was not forgetting, and that justice was not only punishment, but also restoration where possible. Most of all, he learned that bravery could look like small, steady things. Showing up at a hearing, admitting a mistake, saying sorry, taking a child to a park, and teaching her how to skip stones. One evening, as the light from the window laid a warm strip across the kitchen floor, Daniel watched Lucy and Milo tumble on the rug. She laughed, breathless and certain. He felt the ache of memory, Sarah's laugh, the scent of hospital antiseptic, the ledger's pages, and with it a quiet resolve. He would tell Lucy the truth when she was old enough to hold it. He would teach her about promises and the cost of careless trust. He would teach her about mercy that asks for change and justice that asks for truth. When he tucked Lucy into bed that night, she pressed her small hand into his and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy." It was more than gratitude for a puppy. It was a child's recognition that her world had been saved by someone's honest, steady work. Daniel kissed her forehead and looked at the photograph of Sarah on the fridge. He said softly into the dim room, "We will be all right." It was not a promise that erased everything. It was a promise to try to hold true to what mattered, and to keep building one careful, honest day at a time. So, tell me, if you were in his shoes, mocked and underestimated, would you have revealed your success or walked away in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that flip the script on arrogance.